Welcome to another episode of Kitchen Sink Dharma, and today I want to speak about stillness and tranquility, and a little bit about how we can soothe the nervous system, whatever happens to be going on around us, how we can regain our balance and keep our hearts open in this very unstable world that we live in, and how we can find enough steadiness inside ourselves to keep an open heart in the face of all the suffering that we encounter. Because right now, we seem to be living in a world that doesn't entirely fit who we are. You know, as a species, we evolved in a very different world. And for most of the past 200,000 years, we got all of our news from the tribe, and we kept up to date with what was happening within a few miles of where we lived. And our psyche was never evolved to process what's happening across the entire world. And that's what we hear about now. We hear about what's happening everywhere. And life may have been more dangerous, it might have been less comfortable than it is now, but we always had people around us, and there were people who could help us to process what was going on. And for most of the last couple of 100,000 years, we could eat together, we would hunt together, we would tell stories together, we would perform rituals together, we did everything together. And now every day the sorrows of the world come at us, and they hit us with the intensity of a fire hose. And we're constantly being warned of disaster, and most of what we hear is not actually immediately life-threatening, but it elicits the same reaction in the body as, say, for example, an encounter with a predator. And it can leave us with constant low-level anxiety. Or something in our own lives might be weighing us down, and it might be feelings that we can't fully process, that are not metabolized, feelings that burden us. And our bodies carry that load, we hold it all deep within our physical bodies. And we need a bit of space in our day to release that burden. And that's something that tranquility can offer us. Tranquility gives us a chance to heal, and it's really good for us in a number of different ways. It helps our mood. It's beneficial for the body and mind, and it allows us to be a bit less reactive. And it helps us to access our inner wisdom. It helps us to access our own understanding, and it's good for our mental health. We all have some capacity for what the Buddhists call samadhi. Now, the word samadhi means collectedness. Sometimes it's translated as concentration. Although the word concentration isn't ideal. It implies hard work, really. Samadhi is much more about ease. It's about lightness. It's about a mind that's undistracted. And our capacity to drop into samadhi states varies very much from person to person. For me personally, it's much easier if I'm on retreat, or when I'm somewhere out in nature, for example, with no other major demands on my attention. And the problem is that samadhi is affected by conditions. It tends to go out the window when there's a lot of external agitation. But it's not about all or nothing. It would be very easy to say, I'm just not going to bother because there's too much going on right now. But we can always cultivate some degree of calm and collectedness, no matter what's going on. And it's that ability to regulate our levels of arousal moment to moment, and it's how we soothe ourselves. That's what I'm talking about today. A really acute stress response tends to start in the more primitive part of the brain, and our survival mode of fight or flight is activated, and we react instinctively, we react very quickly. And that's often accompanied by very intense feelings in the body. And this is something we evolved with. It helped us to cope with the physical dangers that we used to encounter in our environment. But the problem is we live in a very different world now. So when we receive a nasty email or an unexpected bill, or when we watch the news and we just feel helpless to do anything, these responses of fight, flight or freeze are not necessarily the most helpful ones. Most of us get agitated many times during the course of the day. It's just part of being human. And the body can get flooded with stress hormones. And we can get hijacked by this response. It can become a habitual reaction. Part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex helps us to manage and regulate our stress. But we can do our bit to help that regulation, and the starting point might be to make positive choices about how we respond. Because paradoxically, what we often choose isn't what's going to help us. So most of us have a set of strategies for distraction, for dissociation. We actually dive in further to the stress. We go straight towards it. We go doom scrolling or obsessing, just so that we don't have to feel what we're feeling. So we can actually start with the intention to make space for moments of calm to allow some tranquility in, to reconnect with the body and the breath, for example. And the mere intention to do that can be enough to modify our response. And there's many ways we can soothe ourselves, sensing into our connection with the ground beneath us, dropping the attention down into the body. Actually 5 minutes of just consciously making the out breath a little bit longer than the in breath works really well. Or even just walking, resting the attention on the breath for a minute. I'm willing to bet that if you're listening to this, you'll have some kind of skillful approaches to stress. Maybe some as well that aren't so skillful. My whole point is the cultivation of tranquility doesn't actually have to be associated with formal meditation. It can be just something that we do all day throughout the day. There's countless opportunities that come up. And it helps to be aware whether we're feeding our agitation or calming it. So Buddhist teachings sometimes refer to stilling the formations. In other words, allowing unhelpful patterns and habits of thought to subside. And stillness in this context isn't about doing nothing. It's not about the absence of activity. It's just about the absence of reactivity. It's the absence of craving and irritation and annoyance and resentment. In other words, it's the absence of wanting things to be different. So more stillness, more collectedness means a more conscious response to what's going on in the present moment. It's our gateway to wholeheartedness, if you like. It's our gateway to mindfulness and compassion. And you don't have to be on a meditation retreat to experience it. It's something that can just be part of our everyday lives, and it can influence other people around us. Because it's easy to forget about the whole relational aspect of soothing ourselves and regulating our emotions. Much of our aggravation and agitation and suffering isn't ours alone, it's something that we share with others. And the way that we manage our own stress and agitation has a real effect on the people around us, both the adults and the children. We're evolved to be able to attune to others, to actually be in attunement with other people. If you can regulate your own nervous system, you're actually helping the people that you're with to do the same. Particularly our children, they pick up our stress and how we deal with it. And babies learn this. They learn to manage their feelings in the arms of the caregivers. And we talk about co-regulation, and that's something that applies to all of us. The more that you can tune into the body and steady yourself, the more you can actually help others to do the same. The stillness can be really highly contagious, but in a good way. And to me, this is really important. We're actually living in a time when we really need people who can hold it together without dissociating, without overreacting, without feeding into the collective anxiety. People who can actually allow their feelings to be what they are, to come and go. People who can actually respond with compassion and care in the midst of all the madness. So I'm going to read a bit out from Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva. It's usually referred to as the Shantideva prayer. Some of you listening might know it quite well. Shantideva was a scholar and a monk in the 8th century, and he lived in the monastic university of Nalanda in India. So this is from the Shantideva prayer. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need, for as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain. Until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. So to me this is an extraordinary expression of compassion. And on first reading it can come across as too ambitious, too extravagant, but really it's about how we engage with suffering, how we live with steadiness and openheartedness even in this whole crazy world. And compassion starts with learning how not to be swayed by hatred and greed. And then we learn to see all other beings as just like us, just creatures of sorrow and joy. None of this is possible if we can't bring some intention to our daily lives, if we can't start to engage with our reactivity, if we can't learn to calm our troubled minds. So this is about seeing the value in moments of calm and stillness, and actually making time for them, not just for yourself, but for the sake of everybody else, for the sake of the world. And that is this week's episode of Kitchen Sink Dharma. Come and join me again next time.